And thank you very much. Of course, it is a kind of a providential sign that I come here to have the opportunity of speaking after Father Victor Ferrao. And I'm sorry, so when perhaps we could spend here a full day discussing issues of entanglement, that I'm now perhaps in an unfair manner disentangle things, but in philosophy there is never a complete disentanglement, because as we make things possibly more simple, more clear, we are just getting ready for more complication and more ambiguity. So it was really a pleasure listening to you. I had a couple of things to say. It would be great to debate them. But you gave a good example, as many other speakers, all the other speakers before me, of what the hermeneutical exercise can mean in a particular context. I'm going to give, trying to give some aspect of the European understanding of the art of understanding, perhaps in a manner that will not be very enlightening for many of you. I hope at least for the students here, and I'm very pleased and honored to be with all of you here today. Might be something that we may take from this. In any case, things are as they are, and I enter immediately into my presentation so that we might have time to discuss things, or even to return to previous issues if there is a point in doing that. My first point. To speak about hermeneutics in the European context of the history of ideas means, first of all, to talk about a new thinking. And this is something I underline very much. That is, a new approach to fundamental issues in different realms of philosophy. The new philosophy of hermeneutics understands all that is to be understood in terms of interpretation, and thus cannot proceed without a constant reference to the human world. As such, hermeneutics means a critical theory of interpretation, whereby interpretation stands for a specific way of understanding human understanding. Hermeneutics, therefore, means a general theory and a praxis of interpretation, and is inseparable from an array of different disciplines such as philosophy of language, semiology, epistemology, and communication. And after I hear Father Ferrao's talk, I will add politics as well. And it, needless to say, implies a general anthropology or theory about the nature of the human being as, I would say, being involved. As a practice, if not as theory as well, hermeneutics has a long history. We might say, for the sake of brevity, that as an aspect of the philosophical experience, it is inseparable from the interpretation of law and, most importantly, of the sacred scriptures. For example, in European Middle Ages. We could refer, for example, as another example, the rabbinical experience of interpretation, since one of the aspects inseparable from Jewish experience is the idea that in each line of the Torah there is at least 10 different meanings to be found. So this is why the interpretation is so crucial to the Jewish Christian experience as such, as interpretation of the Bible. This is where hermeneutics comes from. And the Jewish side of it is extremely important. If you take any verse of the Bible or of the Torah to have 10, symbolically, 10 different meanings, that means there is nothing else to do but to be an interpreter. Should the question have to be put in terms of a philosophy of law, then we would simply say that the hermeneutical dimension of the European culture is inseparable from the process of interpreting and applying the Constitution. And by the way, I don't know, I'm not aware of the Indian Constitution, but I heard at some point in the past that it is one of the most interesting constitutions in the world. And I could only imagine the role and the importance of the art of interpretation when it comes to truly apply, for example, in this country, the Constitution to the different realms, different levels of reality, social, politically, economically, and all other aspects. Schleiermacher and Dilthey are the ones that in the 19th century first, or most conspicuously, developed a general theory of interpretation. This is well known. They became particularly important for the development in Europe of an authentic and self-conscious hermeneutical approach both to texts and to existence as such. Schleiermacher and Dilthey both taught the European person of culture to look at human existence in terms of an hermeneutical process. According to Dilthey, human life is nothing but a process of self-interpretation. In the end, philosophy appears with these two thinkers as a general method not just for the interpretation of texts, but also for the interpretation of human existence as such. Dilthey was particularly concerned with the formal distinction between, allow me to use the German expression, the Naturwissenschaften, the sciences of nature, and Geisteswissenschaften, the sciences of the spirit, human sciences, if you will. Something that in his mind was inseparable from the perceived need to transform hermeneutics into the equivalent of a science. And yet, hermeneutics always tended to remain more a form of art than a science in the proper sense of the term. Perhaps the best definition we can find for hermeneutics within the history of ideas in Europe is one that makes it to be the art of deciphering all forms of indirect meaning. According to Schleiermacher, there are two main functions for hermeneutics as a Kunstlehre, a theory of art in regard to interpretation. In the first place, there must be hermeneutics whenever there is the experience of misunderstanding. And again, I think the Goan example is probably a good example of what it means to the need and importance, also in the political sense of the word, for hermeneutics, as a task, as a responsibility, as a mission. It's not just something that is out there that we can grab or not. We need it. Particularly whenever, and I don't think, as it was said before, that there is no human situation where there is no need for a disclosure of the deep meaning of any given situation, because human beings always place themselves in conflicting situations in the relation with one another. In fact, I think this is where the critical function of hermeneutics comes from. On the other hand, we have to consider the romantic dimension of the hermeneutical approach, that is the understanding of hermeneutics as a task focused in search for an understanding of the author of the text that at least is as good as one he has of himself, but eventually might be even better. So this is the romantic ideal of the hermeneutical art of interpretation. One way or the other, for Schleiermacher, hermeneutics always implies a strong coexistence between the reader and the author of the text we face in interpretation. Dilthey seems interested in making hermeneutics more than a Kunstlehre, art, as Schleiermacher tend to see and practice it, something belonging to the realm of science. Where Schleiermacher emphasized psychology, Dilthey decided to underline history. Indeed, it is as a science of history that hermeneutics might be compared to the process proper to the natural sciences. For Dilthey, the coherence of the text is nothing but a reflection of the coherence of history itself. History is nothing but the text or the expression of life. But how is historical knowledge possible? Dilthey privileges verstehen over erklären, understanding over explanation, since for him human life, more than anything else, is nothing but the process of self-interpretation. Life interprets itself and achieves self-objectification through signs and symbols. Accordingly, my life can be truly interpreted only if set in relation with the life of others. That is, when understood as a process, what he calls nachbilden, a process of imitation, because human beings as relational beings are always in a process of imitating one another. The narrative or expressing of my own life must always be interconnected with other life narratives, with other life memories. My narrative must always be part of a wide network of stories of and about life. For Dilthey, this is what Nachbildung, imitation, actually means. In a way, this is the positive side of entanglement. We are always entangled. My narrative can never be totally disentangled of the narrative of the story of another, of many others actually. And I think Goa is, for historical reasons, is a very good example for that. The achievement of a self-narrative through the detour we build whenever we start listening to the stories of others. I come to me, to myself, to my own history, to my own narrative as I learn and practice the listening to the history, to the story of others, of the other, or of the many others. Another important figure in the establishment of the hermeneutical approach in Europe was, of course, Ernest Cassirer, a thinker deeply convinced that human thought is radically symbolic and thus must be understood as deeply grounded in language. In a first approach, human language appears as nothing but imitation, a mimesis of nature, something that leads Cassirer to talk about mythical moments in the development of human language. This first phase is then followed by the critical one, that is, the moment in which language becomes analogical, a development which as such derives from the human ability to choose characters when it comes to self-expression. The third moment in the human process of language formation, according to Cassirer, is the logical or scientific one, the moment in which language achieves symbolism in the proper sense of the word. According to Cassirer, therefore, language appears endowed with an instrumental nature in relation to thought, and as such is inseparable from the process by means of which it evolves from a simple visual expression to the establishment of the conceptual analytical ability to find pure logical relations within the ontology. Cassirer considers that there is a deep interconnection or an absence of contradiction between mythos and logos. Most importantly, the passage or evolution from mythos to logos, or the return from logos to mythos, are in Cassirer inseparable from the linguistic process as such. Language appears as the way in which mythos hides logos, and logos, in the final account, always preserves mythos. In other words, this is this circularity that goes between the attempt to universalize understanding and the absolute need to always go down to the singularity and particularity, for example, of any given culture. The approach of Cassirer to hermeneutics, furthermore, is also defined by a perspective based on the idea that there is a realm of interlanguage that mediates between myth and logic. In this case, hermeneutics appears as a critical instance endowed with a universal dimension and the recognition of a double effect in the use of critical language. On one hand, criticism of logos from the perspective of mythos, and on the other, facing critically the imperialism of logos from the perspective of mythos. As an analytical reason, philosophy is called to proceed to that analogical interpretation of truth that lies both in myth as well as in logos. Thus, the hermeneutical project of philosophy brings about the dialogue between mythos and logos, that is, between the language based on equivocity and language that ultimately claims pure univocity, as it will be said to be the case with modern science. For Heidegger, however, the crucial issue of hermeneutics is rather the explanation of the ontological ground upon which the sciences find their own grounding. Hence, the importance of the attempt made in Sein und Zeit to psychologize the understanding of Dasein as being involved. With Heidegger, the issue of interpretation is no longer a question of reflection, but stays intimately related to our own pre-understanding for verstehen. Hence the importance of Heidegger's analysis of the Stimmungen, of the moods of the subject in Sein und Zeit. And again, I think that an issue like in a community where there is conflict, to pay attention to the mood is extremely important. Because if you don't recognize the mood in which you are in, you are bound to conflict and not to find ways out in terms of the use of the light of reason. So this is a very important aspect in Heidegger's being and time. The Stimmung means that the human subject is dispossessed of the control of its own situation. And this is the drama of violence. This is why it is so serious when we do mistakes, and why we also as communities, we pay the mistakes we do. Because once we enter into a process, it's very difficult to stop it. As geworfen, as thrown into the world, the human subject is no longer possible of being understood as the origin or source of meaning. But Heidegger ended up failing the task of making a strong enough connection between the ontological dimension of hermeneutics and the different regional ontologies. Most importantly, as Ricoeur will later say, the crucial difficulty of the Heideggerian project remained the lack of philosophical integration of the contemporary debates issued from critical instances, such as the ones developed by the three major masters of suspicion, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Sigmund Freud. On his part, Hans-Georg Gadamer made it possible for hermeneutics to undergo the experience of a strong return to the question about the proper foundations of the human sciences in general. Deeply indebted to the thinking of Heidegger, Gadamer was particularly engaged in the attempt to express the ontological Zugehörigkeit, the belonging of the human being in terms of art, history, and language. For Gadamer, the task of hermeneutics is inseparable from the effort to identify the question retrieved at the outset within any given text, so that the practice of hermeneutics becomes inseparable from the recognition that the subject's belonging to being precedes each and every scientific undertaking. Hermeneutics deals with the basic tension that lasts between sameness and difference, between one and the other. For Gadamer, three are the unavoidable aspects of any hermeneutical process. The consciousness of the history of the effects, or Wirkungsgeschichte, that is, of the effects of history upon the subjects of interpretation that we are. And again, you so nicely applied Ricoeur to your entitled hermeneutics in the Goan situation. I think the Wirkungsgeschichte must be recognized. I think the Goan community must recognize, not to go beyond that, but 450 years of history as an effect. Cannot avoid that. It's ontological inscribed. For good or worse, but this is a fact. The Wirkungsgeschichte is there, and will continue to be there. And I think, thank God for that. This is what we are. And secondly, the fusion of the horizons, the famous Horizont und Verschmelzung. And third, the Sprachlichkeit, the linguistic nature of human existence. That is, the awareness that we are beings in and of language. This is the reason why it is so important. The choices, the linguistic choices we make. You so kindly made me aware of the games of Lusophonia that I didn't know about that. Well, I think it's a great thing, but I'm wondering that why, for example, is the Portuguese language so poor in that context? For example, in the official presentation of the games, Lusophonia means Portuguese speaking. You know, the trauma must be there, but the politics of language is not irrelevant for the way I think we deal with our own trauma. If I go to do psychoanalysis, If I do it in English, or I do it in Portuguese, or I do it in Italian, or whatever, makes a difference. So the choice of language, the politics of language is very relevant. And I think this is what Gardner meant with this idea of the Sprachlichkeit of the human condition. We are always embedded in a language. We are linguistic by nature. Most importantly, Gardner also sustains that we can never approach an interpretative task without being affected by our own prejudices, so that because of our own fork or failure, we can never hope to fully achieve an objective reading of reality. This is our hermeneutical condition. Homo hermeneuticus means that, the awareness that as we strive for truth, as we strive to get to know the real, we are condemned not to get there, but to approach it in a kind of eschatological process, only the eschaton. And again, I think this is perhaps could be in the Indian context one of the symbolic approach of the Roman hermeneutics would be just to bring about, to put it before the eyes of all, this eschatological dimension of what it means to be an interpretative being of our own condition. We get there not now, but in future, a future that is always bigger than ourselves. Because we are all sons and daughters of prejudices, all of us. And the worst prejudice is the claim to have no prejudice. It's the most dangerous one. It's the most unjust. In fact, this is the most totalitarian one, because one who claims to be unprejudiced is one who is ready to use force to overcome the position of the other. In other words, the critical moment of interpretation always goes beyond the model of romantic hermeneutics, something directly implied in the transition from speaking into writing. And yet, as Paul Ricoeur will show, there can be no hermeneutical process outside of dialectic between the moment of belonging and the taking of critical distance. And I think this is what self-awareness means. We belong. Our basic condition, we become aware of ourselves as we realize our own belonging to the mystery of being. And by that, it means also to belong to a family, to belong to a community, to belong to a commonwealth, to belong to many other things. But the hermeneutical, the art of interpretation, cannot be done, cannot be achieved with this critical dimension. Without the critical dimension, where I take distance, I relativize my own point of view, my own belonging. And I think, even looking at the South African experience with Nelson Mandela, not to go to Mahatma Gandhi, which probably would be the right example to give, I think this is what the issue of reconciliation is all about. I think that reconciliation begins with memory, a just memory, and as we develop it, we end up always recognizing that the first step of reconciliation is the reconciliation with myself, my wounded self, my broken self. Le sujet brisé, of which Ricoeur speaks so much. We are all broken. All broken. In the main part of this paper, which I'm not going to read because I have only 5 minutes, less a few seconds, I was planning to concentrate on the contribution of Ricoeur, the philosopher of hermeneutics that best brings together the two dimensions of the hermeneutical process. That is, that famous dialectic of explanation, erklären, and verstehen, understanding, comprehension. With Ricoeur, we do indeed come to see the integration of the possibilities of both the natural and the human sciences, of science and art, of explanation and understanding. As it happens, however, the hermeneutical project of Paul Ricoeur, preoccupied as it is with the validity of the modern project of a philosophy of reflection, finds one of its most important in the recognition of the hermeneutical nature of the self. That is, in an understanding of man, of the human being, decentered upon the notion of an hermeneutical self, that is, of a cogito, that is wounded and splitted. This is the shift in the European vision of the world and the European vision of man. This is the magnificent, the extraordinary importance of the hermeneutical process, even in terms of ontology with Heidegger, is that the cogito, the Cartesian cogito, this cogito that is transparent to itself, self-empowered, the powerful cogito, becomes relegated to a second or third place. The real cogito, as I said before, is the one blessé, wounded. And it is not just the Goan self. This is the European self as well. There is no self that is not blessé. And if we not admit that, what the danger is that we transform the critique of colonialism, for example, in a strategy unknown to us to become recolonized. Because there is no void in the human sphere. And if it is not the European colonization, it will be some other colonization. There are many colonizations going around. Right now, there are many colonizations. One of them is the colonization of the multinationals. Who among us here is not colonized by the ideas that we received uncritically, for example, through publicity? Human subject towards understanding, Ricoeur fosters, is thus radically open to the need for a constant ratification of self by means of the interpretation of the interpretative detour always given with the hermeneutical process. The human self achieves fulfillment only through the mediation of others. And I know that here in India, the issue of conversion is very, very important, very sensitive. I want to say that perhaps I could wish, if I could express a wish, is that I think the word conversion is one of the most important words we have in our human vocabulary. We are always in need of changing. And because of the politics of religion, or the politics that always is implied in any administration of a pluriverse, a cultural pluriverse, to degrade the notion of conversion to just a political dimension, I think it can be very dangerous. Because by nature, the human self is in a standing need of being converted. Self converted to the authenticity of self. Self looking to a more profound, a more deeper, more authentic dimension of itself. And I think this is actually what perhaps in the overall context of the history of ideas and of the history of culture, this is perhaps one of the major contributions of Christianity, even to Asia. Is the contribution of calling up to authenticity, to the authenticity of the self. And this is what the Christian experience is all about. It's not primarily about domination, it's about liberation. And a Christianity that does not exemplify that, even in constitutional terms, in terms of law, that regulates the life of people and communities, I think is a failure. And if our Christianity is not liberating enough, we need conversion. So conversion, I think, is, I don't know if the semantics of the word can be recuperated in a context, but I think, for me, is one of the most sacred words in the religious language. Because religion is about that. Religion is about conversion, not of my set of ideas to your set of ideas, or your set of ideas to my set of ideas, but to this more deeper, profound authenticity of what we are as interpretative beings, as wounded selves in search of self, trying to construct and to build a narrative that is liberating, that is loving, that allows for reconciliation, for peace and justice. Well, I think I have now about 1 minute.
No, minus 2 minutes.
Huh?
You have 2 minutes again.
I have 2 minutes? Okay, thank you. Just to conclude this, you know, in a very, I'm sorry, I got distracted. Anyway, the text was longer than I could ever read. So as a theory of man, as an anthropology, hermeneutics means the recognition of the proper role of language in the understanding of being, so that in the end, the human being just appears as if a language game, a symbolic conjugation of the different, more or less complex anthropologies embedded in the uses of language and in all different forms of linguistic sedimentation. And again, this is the reason why I think to learn the language of the other is the crucial thing. The hermeneutic turn in the European thought of the 20th century became those coincident with the anthropology that thinks of self as hermeneutic. The anthropological philosophy issued from works such as Heidegger's Being and Time and Gadamer's Truth and Method can thus be simply characterized as intrinsically hermeneutic. First of all, because the human being appears now deeply decentered in and through language, as well as in and through the history of his own self-interpretations, and no less by all the attempts of man at achieving hermeneutical reflexiveness. This means also that man is first and foremost a relational being, that is not an essence, substance, or thing, but a totality constituted of relations, and intrinsically open. Such relationality is inseparable from language and communication, and in final account remains inseparable from interpretation as the most authentic form of the human approach to the reality of the real, to use the Lacanian idiom. The hermeneutical term, therefore, means that the human being needs to be recognized as an animal of interpretation, and furthermore, that so as the human being signifies language, so does language fundamentally refer us back to reality. As animal hermeneutical, the human being discovers himself as the being of interpretation, or rather the being whose being is interpretation. Human life, as Ortega y Gasset, a famous Spanish philosopher of the 20th century, would say, is constitutively hermenéutico. Now, a little Spanish. Nuestra vida, la de cada cual, es por fuerza interpretación de sí misma, es formarse ideas sobre sí y los demás. This is life. Life is to form ideas about himself, about oneself and the self of others, and about the others. To exist as human being means thus to exist as the being whose being is language. As being endowed with meaning, the human being finds himself in the logos of language, in a meaning that goes beyond meaning, and as such must be said in and through language. And yet, as interpreters, the human being must always retain the capability of also remaining silent, which I will do very soon. After all, this is one of the aspects of the anthropological paradox that, as an hermeneutical philosophy, can help us understand. We need the word to access meaning, and only in and through silence can we find answers, always destined to remain provisory, to the ultimate Sinnfrage, the question of meaning of our existence. Indeed, the question of meaning as the structure of language, and language reveals itself as what it ultimately is, a sign of transcendence, the carrier of an ultimate referent, the access we have to being or God's own mystery. Thank you very much.